We are ready, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And were you going to share the slide deck? Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the February 3rd EMTSC Audit and Finance Committee regular meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Just quickly before we get underway, I'd like to extend welcome to Councillor Ben Gronberg. This is his first meeting joining us today, so welcome to the committee and welcome to the EMTSC. With that, just provide some opening remarks. Reminder that this meeting is being live streamed and it is also being recorded. And all of the participants in the meeting are either in their place of work or respective homes. Welcome to all of our guests, everybody who's joined us today, and to the members of the public watching our live stream or later the recording of this meeting. We have a very brief agenda in front of us today. Oh, sorry, move on to our land acknowledgement first. On behalf of the Audit and Finance Committee, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional land in which we're virtually gathered as Treaty 6 land. We would like to thank the diverse Indigenous people whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Blackfoot peoples. We also acknowledge that this is the Métis homeland and the home of the largest concentration of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. It is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from around the world to share the Edmonton metropolitan region as home. Now, with that, we will move on to the agenda for today. Again, we have a fairly short agenda this afternoon in front of us. And so I will look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented, unless administration has anything that they would like to add.
So move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. Administration?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Using the raise hand function in Zoom for voting, I will call that to question. All those in favor? And I see 4 hands. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. With that, we will then move on to the administrative budget amendment. Mr. Jankowski, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And in some ways, I'm somewhat apologetic for having to call this committee together today. We have only one item that is really an administrative amendment to the budget, which the board approved late last year for the 2022 calendar year. What we neglected to do as part of the budget presentation, and therefore as part of the approved budget, was to include for this year a confirmation or a reconfirmation of the weighted cost allocation for the 2022 calendar and budget year. It should have been included. We neglected to, we intended to use the same weighted cost allocation as had been in place for 2021. We neglected to note that there was kind of an expiry date that was identified on amendment number, or sorry, on schedule number 1 to the governance bylaw, which stipulated that that particular weighted cost allocation was only to be in place until such time as the first annual budget of the commission was to be approved. The budget that was presented in November and confirmed by the board in December is that first annual budget, and therefore we should have included the reconfirmation or the readaptation of the weighted cost allocation that the board had been using in 2021. What it really means is that until such time as we undertake the actual operation of transit services, at which point the weighted cost allocation to distribute the costs to all of the member municipalities will reflect the overall cost of transit service delivery and the allocation of all those costs. Until that time, this original weighted cost allocation, in our opinion, remains the the correct one or the appropriate one for the board to use in not only the consideration of the allocation of the stand-up costs, but also to be used, and probably most importantly, to be used as the basis on which any special resolutions would have to be adopted by the board. So for that reason, for that very significant reason, we bring this forward as an amendment as we go through the next few months, particularly as we go through the development of strategic planning objectives. That approval of and confirmation of the strategic plan will be subject to a special resolution. And when we started to consider the fact that we would have to pass a special resolution, that's when we realized that the basis for that, which is the weighted cost allocation, remained to be reconfirmed for 2022. So again, I apologize for the fact that we had to take your time today just for this simple recommendation of this administrative amendment to the budget, and with hopefully with this committee's blessing and endorsement of this amendment, it could move forward to the board for their reaffirmation and reapproval and amendment to the operating budget later this month. So I will leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jankowski. I do see a couple of hands up. I believe we had Councillor Houston was first. Councillor Houston, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul, for the explanation. And, you know, basically this is, I guess, deemed to be a bit of an oversight. It doesn't affect any change to the proposal that was drafted originally by the board and everything else. So I think this is just a housekeeping item with an amendment to add this, and we're certainly supportive of it. We floated this by our administration. They have no concerns at all with this. It's just simply a housekeeping agenda item. So we're supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. Mr. Gronberg.
Hello, and thank you for that initial welcome to the committee. As a new member for this committee, I'm just trying to get my feet wet and kind of understand a little bit more. So in terms of this weighted cost allocation, is this based on population or is this based on assessment values?
So it is my understanding that as part of the original business plan development, this weighted cost allocation was brought forward, and it reflected the anticipated contribution of transit services and the anticipated initial distribution of transit services that would be in place. It does, in that respect, it does reflect somewhat the distribution of population as well as the distribution of assessment, but it's really most reflective of the anticipated overall scope of transit service delivery on opening day. And I suspect that perhaps Councillor Laurie, who was actually privy to the development of this original weighted cost allocation, or Councillor Finstad might have something to add about that past history.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. No, basically hit the nail on the head there. The way that the cost allocations were broken down was based on the services, the percentage of service received. So as the various routes, et cetera, were developed and proposed, there was certain percentages from those routes in which communities they served. And that is how the initial cost allocation was presented. Obviously, as we move forward closer to opening day and actually having operational service, there will likely be somewhat of a change to that because some of the original proposed routes may or may not exist anymore, and the services may be weighted a little bit different. So at the current time, this is kind of, as Paul mentioned, the status quo. And as we move towards operating, that will change.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys for that clarification.
Thank you. With that, I'm looking for any other questions or comments.
It was well covered off, Mr. Chair. And with that, I move the Audit and Finance Committee recommend a budget amendment to add a 2022 weighted cost allocation unchanged from the values included in Schedule 1 of the governance bylaw to the board for approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finstead, for putting that motion on the table. And just for clarity to the members on this committee right now and anybody who's potentially watching as well, Mr. Jankowski, I just want to confirm with you the way that 2022 will be funded is still utilizing debt financing. So there will actually be no requisition to any of the member communities for the stand-up costs until such a time as the committee as the Transit Commission becomes operational. Any additional comments on that, Mr. Jankowski?
No, I can confirm that the budget that was adopted by the board remains in place unchanged, and that did anticipate that all of the remaining stand-up costs in 2022 would be debt financed. That would be subject to an amendment to the debt bylaw, or the debt bylaw that the board has adopted. It would also be subject to an extension of the line of credit, and thereby an extension of the securities to secure the additional anticipated $2 million to fund the stand-up costs. All of the mechanisms and the procedures for going through those amendments will be put in place and will be advanced by administration for the board's consideration over the coming 2 months. So you'll be hearing more in that regard, but absolutely the intent of the board was clear in its approval of the 2022 budget. The intent was not to request any further or any dollars from the member municipalities for the 2022 calendar year, but to continue to finance operations in 2022 using debt, which would then be subsequently repaid once operations start in 2023, or start being repaid in 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Jankowski. So again, to use the phrase that Mr. Houston had put forward, definitely is a housekeeping item, as even though we have a weighted cost allocation, there is actually no requisition from the member community. So it really doesn't matter too much if we want to put it that way. So appreciate all the comments, and no apologies needed for bringing this forward. Obviously, we want to make sure that we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's as we continue the process here and standing up the commission. With that, we have the motion on the table from Mr. Finstead. I'll just look to see if there are any other comments, questions, or items of debate. Seeing none, then I will call that to question. If you're in favor, please use the raise hand function. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Mr. Jankowski, anything else from you before we close off the meeting today?
That is all. I want to thank members of the committee. I want to also express hello to Councillor Gronberg as the new member of the committee. I thank you very much for considering this proposed amendment. It will be vital as we move forward through the consideration of those matters, which will require a special resolution later in the spring this year. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Gronberg, did you have your hand up there? Nope. Excellent. All right. With that, then I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time this afternoon. I know we were able to keep that nice and short and sweet, but important business nonetheless. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thanks.